Good afternoon to everybody.
Good afternoon,
Good
sir.
afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Very good afternoon. And I purposely would start without any wastage of time because, we have limited time span within which we have to cover a part of the novel. So I straightway go into certain discussion about the background. I gave you an introduction on the last time. So today, not wasting much time on repeating those things again, I would now just talk about a kind of a background so that you can correlate it to the textual reading. Thomas Hardy, in spite of his first love of poetry, turned to the novel primarily because novel was the dominant literary form in his time and it helped him earn his living. Now, critical of the modern theories of realism, Hardy sought his model in the primitive oral tale. As he himself said, we storytellers are all ancient mariners. You know, Ancient Mariner was a very famous poem by Coleridge. And so, behind his novels, we feel the shaping presence of the ballads of love, passion, and betrayal. Now, in some respects, Hardy can be compared to Walter Scott. He consciously revived the name Wessex in his novels, which I mentioned earlier to you. And it seemed to have given a kind of a historical weight. But even then, his characters, like Scott's, are found to be lit in an additional dimension of history. And perhaps some of you may be knowing that in his novel after novels, you have rustics. Rustics play a very significant role. And the rustics play a very significant role in his novels, and they live close to earth that had changed little over centuries. The first chapter, the book that we are going to read a while later, you would find that there are, in fact, altogether 7 books in the novel. And in the first of the book called The Three Women, there are a number of chapters. The first chapter is entitled A Face on Which Time Makes But Little Impression. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share the text with you on the screen so that all of you can focus there. It will help you, in fact. So let me just do that. Now, unmute yourself and just say whether you are able to see my screen. I have muted you, but I have given you permission so you can unmute and say. Are you?
Yes, sir. We can see.
Yes, yes. So this is the text, Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. And here we are going straight to first the preface. See, you have the preface, then you have the book 1 where you have altogether 11 chapters. Then you have book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6, and yeah, book 6. So that's in fact the last, not the book 7. And here you have the preface. And in preface, I would like to point out certain important things that he mentioned, because sometimes we have a tendency to ignore the preface, which we must not do, to understand that, first of all, mark that the date at which the following events are assumed to have occurred may be set down as between 1840 to 1850, But you know that the novel was published in 1878, when the old watering place herein called Budmouth still retained sufficient afterglow from its Georgian gaiety and prestige to lend it an absorbing attractiveness, etc. And then here he makes another very important statement. In the very first chapter, you find Egdon Heath mentioned. Egdon Heath, the general name of Egdon Heath, which has been given to the somber scene of the story. The mark that that particular is a very important phrase. It's a somber scene. So right at the beginning, Hardy is telling us that it's not going to be a comedy. And are united or typified heats of various real names. You remember in the last introduction, I told you that he presents a kind of an imaginary uh, tract of land where nothing grows. And here you have, he says that actually there are 12 which are combined here to give you one Egdon Heath. So that is, Egdon Heath cannot be geographically located, right? But there is something that is almost, that is what makes Egdon Heath a very prominent character in the novel. And it is almost, you can say, a kind of destiny itself. That's what you find. And so now we move straight to the first chapter, a face on which time makes but little impression. A face on which time makes but little impression. Obviously,
Sir,
okay, yeah.
sir, I cannot see that text actually. You haven't selected the text. I can just see your screen, but not the text.
Yeah, I have selected.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, nobody is able to see the text.
No, sir.
No,
No, sir.
it should not be.
No, sir.
Okay, fine. Let me just go back again and share it once again. Let me see why you are not able to see it. It should be. Let me see. Now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's visible
Yes,
now?
sir, now it is visible.
Okay, fine, fine. So this is the first chapter. And the chapter, the title is A Face on Which Time Makes But Little Impression. And this face is not a face of any human being. This is the face of Egdon Heath. You know, you have to understand actually by Egdon Heath, what Hardy is trying to tell us is about a very vast area of a land where virtually nothing grows. And it is a part and parcel of the place where the people live there, right? And it, as I said, it is in fact the second name of destiny, as if you can say that. A Saturday afternoon in November was approaching, the time of twilight, and the vast tract of unenclosed wild. I purposely highlighted some important parts, important phrases, so that our attention can be drawn there. So right at the beginning, Hardy introduces this vast tract of wild place called Egdon Heath. Now the heaven being spread with this pallid screen and the earth with the darkest vegetation, their meeting line at the horizon was clearly marked. In such contrast, the heath wore the appearance of an installment of night. So you understand, it is very mysterious, it is weird, it is something that cannot be changed or altered. In fact, precisely at this transitional point of its nightly roll into darkness, the great and particular glory of the Egdon Waste, mark that word, Egdon Waste began, and nobody could be said to understand the Heath who had not been there at such a time. So the best time to know something about Egdon is night. It could best be felt when it could not clearly be seen, its complete effect and explanation lying in this. So this is a mysterious kind of a power that has its very widespread impact on the people who live there, the rustics. And Mark Hardy describes it as a titanic form seen to await something, as if it is just waiting for something to happen. Then it was a spot which returned upon the memory of those who loved it with an aspect of peculiar and kindly congruity. This is an important statement also. You remember I told you earlier that in Hardy's world, people who belong to a place are somewhat sympathetically treated, but anybody coming from outside is not done. So mark that it was a spot which returned upon the memory of those who loved it. So people who are the native people, people who have grown up with the Egdon Heath, right? And they accept it and they love it. And Egdon Heath also has a kind of a kindly congruity, a kind of an association which is pretty kindly, you can say, sympathetic, you can say. Twilight combined with the scenery of Egdon Heath to evolve a thing majestic, mark that word. And this is why how Hardy has made this a tract of wasteland, a kind of a very second name to destiny, is by use of these words: majestic without severity, impressive without showiness, emphatic in its admonitions, grand in its simplicity. These are very important phrases for all of you to remember. Four expressions: majestic without severity, impressive without showiness, emphatic in its admonitions. Admonitions means no, you cannot do it, and grand in its simplicity. Now, there is therefore a touch of tragedy, a tragic, profound tinge is attached to Egdon Heath, right? And you know, again and again, we have words like somber, okay, titanic, gigantic. The most thoroughgoing ascetic, ascetic is almost like a saint, who doesn't want any kind of luxury, who doesn't really want any kind of comforts, could feel that he had a natural right to wander on Egdon. So he will not face any kind of a problem. He can simply walk there because Egdon is also bare minimum. Okay, Egdon is not going to give you any kind of relaxation or any kind of comfort in that way. So then Egdon was aroused to reciprocity. Mark that. Intensity was more usually reached by way of the solemn than by way of the brilliant. So if you are by nature somebody who is very grave and serious, right? And a sort of intensity was often arrived at during winter darkness, tempests and mists. So when the weather becomes very rough, when you have storm, when you have mist, and when it is night, then Egdon was roused to reciprocity, as if Egdon also responds. The storm was its lover, the wind its friend. So you understand, this is the kind of a character which is presented right at the beginning of the novel. It was at present a place perfectly accordant with man's nature, neither ghastly, hateful, nor ugly, neither commonplace, unmeaning, nor tame, but like man, slighted and enduring. Slighted means one who is punished, one who is wounded, and enduring means somebody who has the capacity to tolerate. And without, and withal, singularly colossal and mysterious. Mark that: colossal, gigantic, titanic, and mysterious in its swarthy monotony. Swarthy. Monotony is boredom. So there is nothing that changes. Age after age, year after year, it remains almost the same. Solitude seemed to look out of its countenance. It had a lonely face, suggesting tragical possibilities. That's the reason a moment ago I said that there is a kind of a tragical hinge, tragical tinge. Okay. Now, skip a paragraph and come here. Here at least were intelligible facts regarding landscape, far-reaching proofs productive of genuine satisfaction. Mark now, the untamable. So another feature that Hardy points out about Egdon is it cannot be tamed. If you think that, well, by your civilizing tools, by your progress in scientific technology, you can really tame the Egdon heat, you are absolutely uh, in some illusion, under some illusion. Civilization was its enemy. You understand? And in its venerable one coat, there is always one color, lay a certain vein of satire on human vanity in clothes. So man may change his dress, man may change the color of his dress, but so far as Egdon Heath is concerned, it just maintains only one color. It may be monotonous, right? But it has that one color, and that really creates a different kind of an impression, and it is very primitive. It's an age-old primitive which defies any kind of change, even under the influence of civilization. To know that everything around and underneath had been from prehistoric times, as unaltered as the stars overhead. Just as, you have the stars, if you look up 5 generations before, if anybody had looked up at the sky, well, they would find the same stars like we now do. So find it, mark it from prehistoric times, right? It has remained as unchanged as the stars have been. The sea changed, the fields changed, the rivers, the villages, the people changed, but Egdon remained. So that is the first kind of a chapter. And you can find, therefore, that a sketch of the history of the heath. Here you find the first paragraph, from geological, prehistoric, and Roman times through the doomsday, the last day, when everything would be destroyed, to the present day. All emphasize how little man has been able to change or affect the sea. Okay, so that is what you have in the first chapter. Any question before I move to the second chapter? Do you have any question to ask me in the first chapter? Come on, you have to say at least yes or no. Please don't waste time.
No, sir.
Okay, fine. No, so let's move now to the second chapter. No, the second chapter is entitled Humanity Appears Upon the Scene, Hand in Hand with Trouble. That's an interesting chapter. And what do we find here? Right. Now, here we find that along the road walked an old man. First of all, we are introduced to an old man, but we are not told who this old man is. He was white-headed as a mountain, bowed in the shoulders, faded in general aspect. He wore a glazed hat, etc., etc. So, and one would have said that he had been in his day a naval officer. So quite an old man with a look of some kind of a military man. And before him stretched the long, laborious road. So he was walking, and the road was empty, okay? And it was quite open to the heath on each side, bisected that vast dark surface like the parting line on the head of a black hair, etc. And the old man frequently stretched his eyes ahead to gaze over the track that he had yet to traverse. So he was just looking up, and suddenly, a long distance away, he found a moving spot, which appeared to be a vehicle, and it proved to be going the same way as that in which he himself was journeying. Okay, so he was suddenly, he took an interest in finding something that was moving, okay, on the road. When he drew nearer, he perceived it to be a spring van, ordinary in shape, singular in color. Is this being a lurid red? This is something very important for all of you to keep in mind. Okay, this is lurid red. Okay, this is lurid red. Now the driver walked beside it, and like his van, he was completely red. So the driver was also red. This is something very important for all of you to mark. One dye of that tincture covered his clothes. So you understand, those who have read the novel, or at least a part of it, that he was the Reddle man. Now this is in fact a kind of anachronism. You know, Hardy was writing this novel in 1878, and he was presenting a Reddleman. Reddleman was a person who used to deal in the riddles. Riddles are actually something that was looked down upon in those days and was extremely red in color, right? And therefore, everything of the Reddleman was covered in red. He was not temporarily overlaid with the color, it permeated him. Mark that. So everything of the Reddleman was red. That's very interesting. Okay. So, okay. Now, the old man knew the meaning of this. The traveler with the cart was a Reddle man, a person whose vocation it was to supply farmers with redding for their sheep. Okay. So that much we come to know. And then the decayed officer by degrees come up alongside his fellow wayfarer and wished him good evening. And then what happened? The Reddleman turned his head and replied in sad and occupied tones. Now we are introduced to the Reddleman. He is an important character of the novel. So Hardy is gradually unraveling. He was young, and his face, if not exactly handsome, approached so near to handsome that nobody would have contradicted an assertion that it really was so in its natural color. Okay, so we are given a certain kind of description of this man. He was clothed throughout in a tight-fitting suit of corduroy, excellent in quality, not much worn and well chosen. Now, a certain well-to-do air. This is something important. So financially he is quite well off. That he was not poor for his degree. Okay, and after replying to the old man's greeting, he showed no inclination to continue in talk. So he was not interested really to continue talking with this old man, whom he anticipated might be asking some not very comfortable kind of questions. Now, what happened? As they thus pursued their way, the Reddleman occasionally left his companion's side and, stepping behind the van, looked into its interior through a small window. So something strange is happening. The Reddleman now and then goes back and he opens something to peep into the van. The look was also always anxious, and he had an anxious look on his face. He would then return to the old man, who made another remark about the state of the country, etc., etc. You know, this is a very common kind of a way that when we talk to somebody and we don't really have anything to say, then we talk about the country, talk about the climate, the weather, etc. Now, uh, possibly these two might not have spoken again till their parting, had it not been for the Reddleman's visits to his van. And perhaps it would have continued like that, but because the Reddleman was again and again going on the backside of the van, trying to peep through, well, it aroused the curiosity of the old man. So when he did it for the fifth time, the old man said, "You have something inside these besides your load?" Yes. Somebody who wants looking after? Yes. Mark. So the old man gradually could not just remain silent. So he started asking, "You have a child there, my man?" "No, sir, I have a woman." "Deuce you have. Why did she cry out?" Mark that. Now, this is a very common kind of a curiosity, uh, to some extent uncivilized, because the moment there is a question of a woman, well, we become extra curious. "Oh, she has fallen asleep and not being used to traveling, she is uneasy." That's what Reddleman's answer is. And the very next question, you can understand, is more objectionable. Now the old man wants to know about the age of the woman. A young woman? Now, he says a young woman. That would have interested me 40 years ago. Perhaps she's your wife. Now, Mark, he wants to know the relationship. So how beautifully here Hardy is capturing the common kind of a habit in all of us when we try to intrude upon others' privacy. And if there is a man and a woman, we become extra curious, not just being satisfied with the knowledge that, it might, they may be friends, they may be anybody, but you start asking what your relationship is. Perhaps she's your wife. My wife, said the other bitterly. She's above mating with such as I. Mark that. And there is a clear kind of a sarcasm and might be a pain. We do not know exactly why he said, well, he is unworthy of her, but there must be some reason that the story would gradually unravel. That's true. And there's no reason why you should not. What harm can I do to you or to her? The red man looked in the old man's face. Well, sir, he said at last, I knew her before today, though perhaps it would have been better if I had not. But she's nothing to me, and I'm nothing to her. And she wouldn't have been in my van if any better carriage had been there to take her. So it's a very peculiar kind of a coincidence that the young woman is inside his van. That's what he says. And where may I ask? At Anglebury. Now he's becoming more and more curious. I know the town well. What was she doing there? Oh, not much to gossip about. However, she is tired to death now. So the lady has been picked up from Anglebury, where she must have been for some reason or the other. And the old man becomes further curious why she went there. She's tired to death now and not at all. Right? Now the question is, a nice looking girl? Well, you would say so. The other traveler turned his eyes with interest towards the van window and without withdrawing them said, I presume I might look in upon her. Mark, now the old man wants to look at the woman. See the curiosity going up and up. No, said the red man abruptly. Enough. It is getting too dark for you to see much of her. And who is she? Now, he wants to know the identity. It is no matter who, excuse me, it is not that girl of Bloomsend who has been talked about more or less lately. If so, I know her and I can guess what has happened. It is no matter. Now, sir, I'm sorry to say that we shall soon have to part company. Right? So the gentleman is not going to provide further any answer. The elder traveler nodded his head indifferently, and the gentleman turned his horses and van in upon the turf, saying good night. The old man replied and proceeded on his way as before. So there we have simply we are introduced to the gentleman, important character, and we are not yet told who this woman is inside the van, but we are told that she has been picked up at Anglebury, that much. And gradually we would know that the gentleman actually is the Petrarchan kind of a lover. You know, the Petrarchan lover is one who loves somebody only single-handedly. I mean, his love is not reciprocated. So the gentleman has been one who has proposed to this young woman who is now happened to be inside the van. And in this very second chapter of the first book, the way the gentleman is presented in this kind of a situation when he could have taken any kind of advantage of the compromising situation that the young woman is at this moment, and yet the way with respect and all the kind of dignity that he has presented himself, well, you can understand that Red Man is a man of true character. Now, once they reach a certain point, well, to do things musingly and by small degrees seemed indeed to be a duty in the Egdon valleys at this transitional hour. But there was that in the condition of the heat itself, which resembled protracted and halting dubiousness. Now, So what happened now is that uh, they are coming to a certain point. The scene before the gentleman's eyes was of a gradual series of ascents from the level of the road backward into the heart of the heath. So once again, that heath, which we read in the first chapter, and they are gradually going to a low land from where they can have the they can have the upper part of the heath. It embraced hillocks, pits, ridges, acclivities, and one behind the other, and etc., etc. As the resting man looked at the barrow, he became aware that its summit, hitherto the highest object in the whole prospect around, was surmounted by something higher. This is important. Suddenly, he could find some person who is right on the top of the barrow, on the heath, right? It rose from the semi-globular mound like a spike from a helmet. The first instinct of an imaginative stranger might have been to suppose it the person of one of the Celts who built the barrow. So far had all the modern date withdrawn from the scene. So it might seem to be somebody very primitive, might have come to the heath at that time of hour. There the form stood. Now we are not introduced who this person is, but we are told that there is a person who was standing at that late hour on the top of the heath in the barrow, motionless as the hill beneath. So there is some kind of a mystery and enigma being built. Above the plain rose the hill. Above the hill rose a barrow. Above the barrow rose a figure. Right. Such a perfect, delicate, and necessary finish did the figure give to the dark pile of hills that it seemed to be the only obvious justification of their outline. So it's a beautiful kind of a background. The person was standing, and with all the other things, it seemed to be a beautifully synced scene. Without it, there was the dome without the lantern, and looking at this, or that member of the group was not observing a complete thing but a fraction of a thing. And then the form was so much like an organic part. That is what I was trying to hint. So she became almost an organic part. I mean, the person standing there, unintentionally, I already mentioned it is she, a woman. The entire motionless structure, than to seek move, would have impressed the mind as a strange phenomenon. Sometimes, immobility strikes us more than mobility. Yet that is what happened. The figure perceptibly gave up its fixity. So suddenly it started moving, shifted a step or two, and turned round. As if alarmed, it descended on the right side of the barrow with the glide of a water drop. This is very important. See the description. This is an interesting description. The glide of a water drop down a bud. This is a beautiful way of expressing the delicacy, the mystery, and the elegance of Eustacia vibe, right? And then vanished. The movement had been sufficient to show more clearly the characteristics of the figure, and that it was a woman's. So a number of things that happens here, right? This is in fact the end of the second chapter. Now what we notice in the second chapter therefore is first that Diggory Venn was introduced, and we are told about his occupation. And as I told you that the Reddleman in fact ceased to exist at the time when the novel was written. So purposely Hardy was setting his novel 40 years at least before the time. So that's a kind of an anachronism. And then we find Venn presented as a Petrarchan lover with his unreciprocated one-sided love affair for a woman inside the van. We are not really told who this woman is at this moment. And then we are in a very interesting manner, we are introduced to the heroine, We are not yet told the name, but in a very curious and intriguing manner, the heroine of the novel is introduced with a tall kind of a figure moving in that semi darkness on that heat, and the way she glided, the way it was described by Hardy, the glide of water drop down a butt, which very clearly indicates that Eustacia Val is a character full of mystery, full of grace, and full of elegance. These are certain things that are pointed out in the second chapter. Now, I stopped sharing it and coming back to you if you have any question to ask, because it's just any second this meeting will end. This is the problem of Zoom. It's just a 40 minutes to do. Any question for you to ask me, or you can even write in the WhatsApp if you have any. Yes.
So why the name of the second chapter is Humanity Appears Upon the Same Sin Hand in Hand with Trouble?
Yeah, actually, see, humanity is here. You get a reference to a young woman inside the van. You have Diggory Ven, and then you have that Eustacia Vi introduced. Trouble, obviously trouble that is not yet revealed. Only in the hint it is said that some